Sunday's game is a heavyweight showdown between DK Metcalf and Broncos cornerback Patrick Surtain. There are three matchups in this game that will define the outcome, including DBs versus wide receivers. We'll break that down and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, the site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. Welcome to another episode of the show here. Thanks to all the everydayers out there on Broncos Country. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day every single day. When you want objective, everyday content on the Denver Broncos, this is the place to be. Locked On Broncos. Hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long. Game time is just around the corner here, Broncos Country. And on today's episode of the show, Sayre and myself, we're going to dive into three matchups that we believe will define the outcome of this game as rookie quarterback Bo Nix makes his first career NFL start where things really matter. But a lot of this may actually not be on his shoulders. The Broncos are going to win this game. We'll look in the trenches. We'll look at the battle between skilled players and defensive backs. You get all that here on the show, which is also brought to you by our friends over there at Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Sayre, my friend, I always like getting into these where we look at the matchups. You know, if the Broncos are going to win or lose this game, what position groups are really going to impact it the most or have the most weight there? I feel like we have to start off with a heavyweight showdown. I think the defensive backfield of Denver against Seattle's wide receiver group. Some questions in Denver's secondary, but no question about who Patrick Surtain is. He is him, and he'll be drawing the coverage assignment there of DK Metcalf.
One of the best individual matchups, I would say, across the entire NFL landscape this week. Cody, we obviously know Pat Surtain is the new $96 million man for the Denver Broncos, getting that contract extension this week. And DK Metcalf is an established, proven, big play wide receiver who can get it done in a variety of different ways. And he's certainly the favorite target there of Geno Smith. So we know that that matchup is going to draw a lot of attention in this game, and justifiably so, because we've talked about it since Pat signed his extension, because we don't often get a chance to talk about Pat in the offseason, right? Because we're focused on guys where there's more questions, but there's really no question about PS2. He is a lockdown corner, and he's exactly the type of player, as Sean Payton alluded to at his press availability earlier in the week, Cody. It really does help out the entire defense to have a guy like Pat Surtain at that cornerback position, because it's not that he's necessarily going to always completely erase a wide receiver out of a game. I think that's one of the things that, it gets overlooked. Can he do that? Absolutely. But limiting what DK Metcalf is really great at is one of those ways that the Denver Broncos are going to be able to potentially beat the Seattle Seahawks. And Pat Surtain is the key to doing that. And he matches up well physically, athletically. He can go step for step. He matches him in terms of quickness. He's got great ball skills, obviously. At the catch point, Pat Surtain is as competitive as they come at the cornerback position. So really, when you look at somebody like DK Metcalf being a huge advantage for the Seahawks in any game they're going to play over the course of a season, Cody, this is where having a playmaker at corner, a $96 million man like Pat Surtain, really becomes an advantage for the Denver Broncos.
100%. Look, he's a guy that's a little bit of a great equalizer, so to speak, because sometimes the balances of the scales can be tipped when you're going against a wide receiver like DK Metcalf. Now, look, I know DK, that Seattle team, they're going to be tough. They're going to be feisty. I caught training camp, on the NFL Network this year in between, being at Broncos practice. And I remember seeing a clip of DK Metcalf swinging some helmet at somebody during that. I don't know if he's going to get fined for that or if he did. But this is a matchup where these two guys have already faced off against each other, and it's a great matchup. Now, I did catch your crossover with Corbin Smith, the Locked On Seahawks, and he said something I was like, I didn't necessarily agree with. He said that in that matchup in 2022, that DK Metcalf had his way with Pat Surtain. And part of me is thinking, like, we were in the same press box near each other watching the same game. What were you watching? Because 7 catches for 36 yards is having your way against Patrick Surtain II. I thought those guys had tremendous battles there. And look, there's a level of respect there, but there's a level of chippiness that we also saw in that game. So I had to push back on that one a little bit, but I think obviously this area in terms of a position battle that's going to determine how this game goes. I think PS2 versus DK Metcalf is going to be very, very pivotal in this one, which now means, okay, hey, if Pat's going to primarily be on DK, which is not going to be every single play, like it's hard in the NFL to be able to do that. But for a majority, I guarantee you we'll see Pat on DK's side, following him where he goes in certain situations that warrant it. But what does that mean for guys like Tyler Lockett, who's, I think questionable coming into this game? He's dealing with an injury, but let's assume he plays. Then you add Jackson Smith and Jigba into the mix as well. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking like, man, okay, hey, now you need your other guys in the secondary to step up. So now our eyes shift automatically to Jaquan McMillan inside the nickel position. Well, more than likely, he's going to see some coverage snaps against Tyler Lockett if he plays, and Jackson Smith and Jigba, which for a guy like Jaquan McMillan, we also don't have any questions about him. So it's like, that's going to be an exciting matchup to watch, though it's going to be a big test, I think, for he and Denver secondary. This is, I think, where the headline should be. It should be this Broncos defensive backfield against Seattle's wide receivers. And PS2, Jaquan McMillan, I think those guys can take away some really good options, but it's going to be a fun battle to watch. I don't know how this one's going to go, but if this game will be determined by how these two guys play.
You know what it's time for, Cody? It's time for Jim Leonhard to cook, because this is probably one of the biggest challenges the Broncos will face all season long in terms of just the talent at wide receiver for the opposing team, right? And we know the Broncos will play talented receivers all year long. But when you look at the depth of this group, like you mentioned, we kind of chatted about that on the Crossover Thursday episode, guys from top to bottom of the Seahawks depth chart. It's an opportunity for defensive backs coach Jim Leonhard to go out there and cook and create these mismatches, create the matchups that he wants to see, get his players and the right personnel out there against the likes of Jackson Smith and Jigba, Tyler Lockett, and utilizing your athleticism in the defensive backfield. Because if the Broncos have nothing else, they are very athletic in that defensive backfield. I mean, Riley Moss was a big-time RAS guy. Pat Surtain, we know, top-tier RAS. Brandon Jones, high RAS score. PJ Locke, very athletic, very versatile. Jaquan McMillan, he can get it done whether he's attacking the line of scrimmage, whether he's playing in coverage. These guys can do a little bit of everything for you. So I think the Broncos, while they don't have guys in the defensive backfield all across the board who are as proven as the receivers that the Seahawks have, right? They do have the talent to be able to match up, and they have a pass game coordinator, Jim Leonhard, who we're talking about how big a test this is for the DBs. This also for Jim Leonhard, as he works hand in hand with defensive coordinator Vance Joseph, a big opportunity for him to show why the Broncos likely made him one of the higher paid defensive assistants in the league, preventing him from taking D coordinator opportunities elsewhere and other things like that. This is his time to shine.
Yeah, and look, on top of that, you also have a veteran player in Levi Wallace who can come in as well. I don't know what Denver's dime personnel is going to look like. We'll get our first look this upcoming week. But, I mean, it also depends how many times are the Seahawks going to come out in personnel that's going to warrant Denver to switch to dime. I think primarily we'll see a heavy nickel emphasis here from the Broncos, because you also have to account for Kenneth Walker, their tailback out of the backfield, a guy who's absolutely capable of ruining your game plan if he makes it past first contact, things along that lines. But that's going to really factor into the next position battles, or between these two teams, that will define the outcome of this game. It's the trenches. It's Denver's offense and defensive lines against the Seattle Seahawks offensive line and D-line. We're going to break down why we think this, for Denver offensively and defensively, will be the determining factor into who wins Sunday's game in the season opener, week 1. You get that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And LinkedIn is not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but they might be open to the perfect role. And in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows small businesses, you wear a lot of different hats. You might not have the time or the resources to hire. That's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. If the Denver Broncos can win in the trenches against the Seattle Seahawks, they can win this game on Sunday. Broncos Country, Cody and I are going to break down and tell you exactly why the Broncos having an advantage on the offensive and defensive lines could potentially be the deal breaker in this game for the Seattle Seahawks as the Broncos look to start off hot, 1-0. On today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we're excited about it. We're excited for game week. We know you are too, and you know that your boys, Cody and Sayre, will be here for you every single day all throughout the season, breaking down everything that happens with your Denver Broncos, whether it's post-game, whether it's breaking news, whether it's day-to-day, we got you. So subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, as well as go hit us up over on YouTube there. And for your second listen of the day, check out the new and improved and upgraded Locked On NFL every single day, where you can find out everything that's going on with teams outside of Denver, in case you want to do a little advanced scouting, figure out what's going on maybe with the Pittsburgh Steelers in week 2 or whatnot. So, Cody, let's talk about this matchup, though, because obviously the trenches is something we talked about a lot this offseason. I mean, you and I both said it. Beyond quarterback, defensive line was the one area that was non-negotiable for George Paton and Sean Payton, the front office. They had to upgrade in the trenches, especially defensively. We saw the offensive line grade out pretty high last year, although I know they weren't perfect by any means. Let's talk, though, about the defensive line first, because the offensive line for Seattle could be their biggest question mark going into this game against the Broncos, whereas the defensive line for Denver, when we saw the starters out there in the preseason, those guys were cooking. Zach Allen, DJ Jones, John Franklin Myers, Malcolm Roach, like the guys that are going to play this week, they were out there playing well in the preseason. I know you saw them doing some of the same stuff there at training camp as well.
Yeah, and look, I think so much of this game is going to be deterrent on, how does the defensive line hold up? And I love the point that you mentioned. This really, outside of quarterback, was the biggest priority for the team in the offseason, where they go out and they get John Franklin Myers, who could end up being probably one of the best additions of this team. No disrespect to Bo Nix, but in terms of value, immediate impact, I think John Franklin Myers will be a difference maker right away on the defensive line, specifically as we talk about, because this defensive line is going to be tasked with trying to stop and limit Kenneth Walker from being able to break off big runs, explosive gains. Like, you have to be able to contain a guy like him. He runs through contact physically. You have to be able to, I say, plug your gaps there. But more importantly, it's also going to be imperative for the defensive line to set the tone a little bit early on, right? If they're getting pushed off the ball, it's allowing that next offensive lineman, right? If they're double teaming down on one guy, they're able to move up to the linebacker, and that's able to create more open lanes for runners. That was the biggest issue for Denver's defensive line last season. I don't see guys like DJ Jones, John Franklin Myers, or Zach Allen getting pushed around for that matter. And then, hey, when those guys need a little bit of a break because they can't be on the field every single down, you have other guys coming into the mix there like Malcolm Roach. And I mean, I think the creativity that Denver can have, even with their outside linebackers, you could see it. Jonah Ellis maybe playing defensive end at some point this season, like in certain personnel packages where you just slide them down. That way you get the best of both worlds. It's going to start and end in the trenches for Denver defensively against Kenneth Walker, against Geno Smith. And this offense that, really there's some question marks about what is it going to look like? Is it going to look like the Washington Huskies offense from last year when they had Michael Penix? Like, the reports coming out of Seahawks camp have been very positive about Geno Smith, but it's like, we really don't know. And you can't get a standard tell when you watch a lot of the vanilla concepts that they run in the preseason. Same thing that you're going to see, I think, as well from Denver side. I think it's the advantage. This is the real portion of the season where all that stuff, the vanilla stuff, kind of goes away. You're going to start seeing the sprinkles added in here and there. And it's an adjustment game, I think, after the first couple of series, offensively, defensively. But it is crucial for Denver, their defensive line, their rotation, the guys that they're going to have there to come in right away. set the tone. Jordan Jackson rotating in when a guy like John Franklin Myers or Zach Allen comes out for a little bit of a breather for 1 or 2 snaps. That's going to be imperative. You can't have a drop off from when your starters come out to when your rotational guys go in. I'm keying that here this week against the Seahawks. And look, I think we also have to focus here. Denver's offensive line against that Seattle Seahawks defensive front.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the offensive line for the Broncos, like I mentioned before, they graded out really highly last year. I know Pro Football Focus graded them highly. ESPN Analytics said that the Broncos were top 10 both in pass block win rate and run block win rate. So, regardless, I guess, of maybe what the perception is of Denver's offensive line based on how many sacks Russell Wilson took, which we know Sean Payton has come out and said on a variety of occasions he believes that's more of a quarterback stat than an offensive line stat. The Broncos do have an opportunity in this game to really establish like, hey, we've got some dogs up front, and that is a highly paid offensive line unit. We heard the players kind of joking about that during training camp of like, hey, you're going up against a really highly paid offensive line. Garrett Bowles, Ben Powers, Mike McGlinchey, Quinn Miners, all of those guys have gotten big money contracts now in the NFL. So they've got to go out there and earn it against a Seattle defensive line, which also has a number of quite highly paid guys, right? I mean, Leonard Williams got the bag this offseason, coming back to Seattle after the trade last year. They also have Draymond Jones, our old friend for the Denver Broncos, who got a big money deal last year. And then they use a first-round pick on Byron Murphy out of Texas to kind of help fortify that unit. And besides that, they've got edge guys they've invested top 50 draft picks in as well, courtesy of your Denver Broncos here. But look, Cody, I think that when it comes to the offensive line, like, this is advantage Denver Broncos until proven otherwise. This was an area the Seahawks really struggled with last year. There's a reason they made the trade for Leonard Williams. There's a reason why they drafted Byron Murphy, is because their defensive line has stunk. And so they have to go out there, just like the Broncos have to go out there and prove their defensive line is going to be better this year. We can't just say, well, on paper, it looks so much better. Seahawks, they have to do the same exact thing. Like, on paper, it looks a lot better. You're going to get a great test week 1 against an offensive line with 4 really highly paid guys and a group that, aside from Luke Wattenberg, Cody, these guys all started almost every game together last year. So the chemistry and cohesiveness is there. This is an opportunity for the Broncos to really win in the trenches, I think, on both sides of the ball.
Well, and I think the biggest question mark is really Luke Wattenberg getting the start of center. Now, luckily for him, he's coming back to an area in which he's very, very familiar with. Even though he's wearing opposing team colors, he's been used to playing in a loud environment there in Washington when he's playing for the Huskies. So he's a little bit different out at the NFL level with the Seahawks, but some might argue college stadiums end up being a little bit louder than the NFL, though I'd say that the Seahawks stadium there at Lumen Field is probably one you can't argue against. It is one of the loudest facilities in all of pro sports in America, at least here. So there is that. And look, I think the combination, we want to see Quinn Miners. We already know what Quinn's going to bring to the table. I think some people want to see how Ben Powers does this upcoming season here. How is he going to fare, and how are those two going to fare specifically when they do line up against Byron Murphy, Leonard Williams, Jonathan Hankins, another name there on that defensive line there. But I think another thing too is like your tackle play there between Garrett Bowles and Mike McGlinchey. We all know Mike McGlinchey, he himself has even come out and said he needs to come out and play better. You want to see him avoid pre-snap penalties, things along those lines there. You want to see him have that improvement. But you're going to be facing guys like Boye Mafe. You're going to be facing Draymond Jones, former Bronco, off the edge. As you had mentioned, I don't believe, and I didn't quite catch it if this was covered in the crossover, but my belief from what I've seen is that Uchenna Nwosu will not be playing in this game as well. He suffered a knee injury a few weeks ago and is likely going to be out. So we haven't seen anything on that. He's not on the injury report. So that more than likely means he's probably going to miss the first 4 weeks of the season there for Seattle. But I'm looking at this and like, okay, hey, these guys, if Denver's offensive line can set the tone and they can find a way to run the football, and Javonte Williams looks the way that Javonte Williams has looked, and then you sprinkle in a little bit of dash of Julian McLaughlin and maybe some power in between that with Audric Estime, I like the Broncos' combination of rush options here in terms of their offensive line against that Seahawks defense. Whereas you look on the inverse, you look at the running back position, you got Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, and Kenny McIntosh there for the Seattle Seahawks. Walker's the only guy that really strikes a little bit of fear into me, like, hey, this guy can bust it open and create a little bit of problems for you. But I like this. I think this is where this game is going to be won or lost. And really, we haven't talked about Bo Nix in this game, but if this offensive line can keep Bo Nix upright, they can run the football. Bo can get the ball out of his hands. I like Denver's chances in this game, specifically when it talks about winning in the trenches. That's going to be defining here for this Broncos team. And look, another thing that we're going to be keeping our eye on here too, in order for Bo Nix to be able to cook, the offensive line has to be able to protect him and play effectively, and also allow him time to find guys getting open. We're talking about Denver's wide receivers against the Seattle Seahawks secondary, and some question marks here for the Broncos wide receiving group after, releasing Tim Patrick. Who steps up in that wide receiver 2 role? We'll break that down here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. And Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and just watch the winnings roll on in. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineups, they stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, on Prize Picks, your picks are still live. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game.
Josh Reynolds came into the offseason here for the Denver Broncos and became a little bit of an important piece early on here for rookie quarterback Bo Nix, who makes his first career NFL start in the regular season. Captain Bo Nix, that is. What type of role will Josh Reynolds play this week if Courtland Sutton sees commanded attention there by the Seattle Seahawks defense? We'll break all that down here on today's episode of the show. Just want to say thanks once again to Broncos Country for tuning in and making us your first listen. We appreciate you so much there in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there. Sayre, I want to open up the floor to you here to start, really, because this is going to be a crucial element as well. There's been a lot of talk about defensive backs. If I'm not mistaken, I remember, wasn't it this offseason where the Seahawks social media, they posted something that kind of took a shot at Pat Surtain a little bit in comparison to, was it a guy like Tariq Woolen? Do you remember that?
Yeah. I don't remember the exact post, but I've heard it referenced before, or I've seen people say, please don't compare PS2 to Tariq Woolen anymore after he gave up a big play in the preseason or so. I did see what you're talking about, what you're referencing there.
So I mean, obviously, Tariq Woolen, in my opinion, I like his skill set. I think he's long, he's athletic, he's kind of like the prototype makeup that you get. Look, over the start of his NFL career, he's been able to snag interceptions. He's going to be guarding Courtland Sutton, I think, primarily for most of this game, unless they decide, Mike McDonald decides to keep his corners on one side of the field. I think wherever Courtland goes, you're going to see Tariq Woolen probably follow him. So in my opinion, look, that's going to be a matchup to watch there. But if they allocate the safety over the top or more coverage resources to protect inside against Courtland, that's where a guy like Josh Reynolds, who in my opinion, he's going to be the number 2 wide receiver. That's where I think he can relish in that role.
He can, and he has to, because the Broncos need guys to get open quickly. I think they're going to try to utilize the quick passing game to keep Bo Nix in rhythm early on in this one. I don't think we're going to see a ton of early deep drops, letting routes really develop against these corners, although we might. I mean, I don't know what to exactly expect, but with Tariq Woolen and Devin Witherspoon, the 5th overall pick in, I believe, last year's draft. I can't remember when the Seahawks got him, but he's another good-looking player there in the secondary. These
Broncos draft pick?
He was, the 5th overall pick. So that was last year's draft. Yeah, so Devin Witherspoon, you're welcome, Seahawks fans, for Devin Witherspoon there. But look, I think that's one of those things that's a huge question mark for me right now. Is do the Broncos have guys that are going to be able to win one-on-one matchups quickly in terms of getting separation and getting open right away? Because Bo Nix, as great as we saw in the preseason from him, we need to make sure that he's not having to run for his life and find guys on scramble drill every time he's completing a pass, right? And I'm not saying that's all we saw in the preseason by any means, but you want to see these guys getting open quickly. We can't be having the concentration drops when Bo puts a ball on the spot on a quick slant and you're trying to keep in rhythm offensively. It's going to take everybody to silence that crowd there in Seattle and to keep the Broncos offense on schedule as we saw in the preseason when Bo Nix was out there. Remember, they didn't have but one drive where they didn't score points when Bo Nix was orchestrating the offense, and that was when Lucas Kroll fumbled the ball. So this is an offensive unit that, like, okay, we've seen the proof. Like, when you guys get going, when you get the quarterback in a rhythm, like, points are going to be put on the board. And so that's one of those things where I just don't know. Is it going to be Sutton, Josh Reynolds, Marvin Mims? Like, who's going to be the one? Might even be a guy like Greg Dulcich emerging early on in this game, Cody, as somebody who's like, all right, our best matchup right away is Dulcich on those linebackers in Seattle, as opposed to looking straight to those receivers on those talented corners.
Yeah, I think and primarily if we're looking at a pecking order, I think for tight end, I think Adam Trautman gets the start. But I'm glad that you brought up Greg Dulcich. I think he could be the wild card factor in this game, specifically if the Seahawks defense is truly focused on Cortland. But kind of what I said going back to earlier on the week, I do think that we're going to see a different look here from Denver's offense in terms of how they spread the production out from a quarterback to receiver standpoint. Not only just receivers getting the football, but you're going to see running backs getting the football, which was an emphasis last year. But you're going to see more involvement from the tight end position. I find it a little interesting when you look at Denver's unofficial depth chart as of September 5th, as of the time that we recorded this here. Interesting enough, behind Cortland Sutton on the depth chart, it is little Jordan Humphrey, who's currently on the practice squad. And we imagine, as George Paton and Sean have not so subtly hinted, that those guys will probably be elevated on game day, which makes a curiosity for us to see who the game day inactives will be on Sunday before the game. But then that goes to tell me, okay, hey, our next guy that we're going to be focusing here on is Marvin Mims. And look, for Marvin, who didn't necessarily have the loudest training camp, and, he caught the touchdown from Bo on an RPO against the Colts in the preseason. This could be a moment here where you and I were debating, like, hey, we haven't seen or heard a lot from Marvin this offseason, which is crazy because Sean said, hey, we're going to feature Marvin in a more prominent role this upcoming season. Was that Sean hiding Marvin? And will we see Marvin unleashed a little bit in this game? I think that if it goes to how I think it may, with coverage resources being allocated towards number 14, I think it opens things up for Josh Reynolds to make plays, Greg Dulcich, as you mentioned, but Marvin Mims with his speed could be an X factor here in the outcome of this game.
The Broncos have absolutely paved the way for Marvin Mims to be like the breakout player offensively for them this season, right? You trade Jerry Jeudy, you go and cut Tim Patrick at roster cuts, pretty surprisingly. I know you got the veterans on the roster in Cortland Sutton and Josh Reynolds, but Marvin Mims is that one guy that's like, okay, athletically, in terms of speed, in terms of the potential that we saw at times last year, like when the Broncos actually featured him in games against the Commanders and the Chicago Bears, like the dude was just, all he did was make plays, right? And so I think that he has a chance to be the breakout player offensively. Not that other guys won't emerge, but Marvin, if he becomes the guy that we think he can be, I mean, he is that one X factor, especially in this game, that, like, I don't know that anybody is necessarily taking overly seriously right now because he hasn't proven a ton at the NFL level. And you're right, he had a quiet offseason. We didn't see much other than that touchdown catch in the preseason from 1 yard away or whatever that was. So I think he has a real chance, Cody. If Sean was hiding him this offseason, if that was the long game, man, this is an opportunity for him to really explode onto the scene and get the Broncos fan base excited about the fact that, man, we've got ourselves a legit wide receiver out there who can make big plays at any given time for this team.
Well, it also solidifies the stance that Sean Payton took by saying, hey, we're going to release Tim Patrick, the veteran guy that, hey, it could be your security blanket. We saw in the preseason there with Bo Nix, and now obviously he's in Detroit. But, I mean, they loved the receiver room that they had, and they had to make some tough cuts. And, of course, you got some guys like David Sills on the practice squad, Michael Bandy. We've already had that conversation. You're missing out on guys like Brendan Johnson and Jalen Virgil, who I feel like could have helped that receiver this year if you had questions, especially with Marvin. So part of me is wondering, there might be something greater going on behind the scenes. And even rookie Devon Vele, who we haven't really brought up just yet in terms of where you look at on the depth chart, he's going to play some offensive snaps here against the Seahawks on Sunday. How might he fare in his first real regular season NFL action? Is Sean Payton going to be proven right on his confidence level in this receiver room? That's something we'll be looking forward to seeing here on the show here. But Broncos Country, as always, want to say thank you so much for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos part of your day every day. Whether you listen to us wherever you get your podcasts or if you watch us on YouTube, we love the community that we've built and that you in Broncos country have helped build with other members of the fan base. Thank you so much. One thing that you can expect from us is you're going to get a show every single day all year long. And on Sundays, you know what it is. Game time. Week 1 is officially here. Following the Broncos Seahawks game, Sayre, myself, we're going to sit down. We're going to react to the outcome of the game, share what our big takeaways and where the Broncos will go from there. That's something you can expect on the next episode, Locked On Broncos. We'll see you then.